Hi everybody. We are Elsie and
Ruth.
from the Global Offer Forum, and today our podcast is about cryptocurrencies, especially in emerging markets. And our guest is Michael Roberts, co-founder of the Better Trader platform. So, hi, Mr. Roberts. How are you today?
Good, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for being here and for accepting our invitation. We have a bunch of questions for you, so we can start by can you present yourself, talk about your experience, and more about you?
Yeah, so my background has been primarily in information communication technology over the last 20 years, and specifically in international development. So I worked for IDRC, which stands for the International Development Research Center in Ottawa, Canada, and we basically were working with development organizations to increase collaboration through the use of ICTs. And through that, we developed a number of tools, collaboration tools. We worked in the area of open data standards. And then eventually I moved on and I joined the Web Foundation. So I was actually working with Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who is the inventor of the World Wide Web. And then around 2017, I got interested in blockchain. And I'd heard about it a few times. In fact, in 2011, I'd actually was asked by the Creative Commons folks in San Francisco. I was working with them a little bit and knew the team, and they said, there's this new thing called Bitcoin. Could you go to this website? And at that time, they were giving away Bitcoin for free. Wow. So I actually got 5 free Bitcoin, and I gave it to them, and I had no idea what they were thinking or why they wanted me to do this, but I just followed their direction and gave them these 5 Bitcoin. And then I forgot about it again. And around 2017, I started getting interested in blockchain because I was always doing trading and paper trading, but I'd never got involved in day trading because of the kind of financial barriers to get involved, because you need to have a bigger account and there's more regulation. And then I saw the Bitcoin price chart, and I saw people were trading this on exchanges, and I thought, wow, and it's 24/7, and this is super exciting. So I switched gears, and I wanted to get into blockchain. I did everything I could to get into the industry, so I basically switched gears from being a director and started volunteering to do customer support with a startup blockchain project in the UK. Got involved with them, they accepted me, and then from there, I worked with an organization called Giveth. And basically, Giveth is effectively an organization that uses blockchain technology to help to fund NGOs. Right. And really fascinating organization to take a look at. And then from there, I was really interested in the trading mindset. So trading psychology, where we're always fighting our own emotions when you're buying cryptocurrency. So most people will buy high and they'll sell low. Mm-hmm. And it's just human psychology why people do that. And I thought, well, when you're trading, it'd be nice to have a little book on the side to just remind you, think about these things when you're trading. So I came across a YouTuber, and his name was Moon and Papa at the time. And he had just started his YouTube channel, it was a couple hundred people, and he was also talking about the same thing. Mm-hmm. So I approached him. He lives in Tokyo, Japan. Mm-hmm. And I said, would you be interested in talking about creating a trading journal? So we talked, and then 3 months went by, and then he followed up and said, are you still working on this project? And I said, I am. I'm slowly putting it together. And he said, well, I'm interested to help you out with that. So long story short, we crowdfunded it in early 2018. We raised $4,000, and we produced this trading journal. And then we realized that this wasn't going to make us, this wasn't going to sustain us as a livelihood. So we started thinking about courses and teaching people about how to use cryptocurrency tools. Mm-hmm. And at that point, then we switched gears, and we used the journal as kind of a lost leader to kind of leverage the idea of these trading courses. We put that together. We launched that in 2019, and it's been almost exactly 2 years now since we started And maybe it's a case of right place, right time, but it took off and it went crazy. And effectively, we're already a multi-million-dollar company within 2 years. And
That's amazing.
and the real interesting thing, and so we hired our first Canadian employee on Friday.
Yeah.
We've been hiring consultants up until now. And the real irony of it all is that, we started this company in the COVID era. So while my business partner and I have a company together, we've never met face to face.
Oh my God.
And in fact, none of our staff have. So none of our consultants, none of our staff have met face to face. We've done everything over Zoom, and what we use is a Discord chat server. And incredibly, it's been effective. And it just goes to show that it's absolutely possible not to be a brick and mortar company in these times. And so you'll find that over time the trust gets built as you interact more and more over Zoom. And so it's been really a really interesting journey. And now we're looking at expanding our course curriculum going into 2022.
We wish you the best luck on that. And I think we're gonna hear from you soon, very soon, in Montreal and in the world. So now we get to know, we have good opportunity to know more about you. We'd like to start the interview in the topic itself, getting to know more about the environment in Canada, or how do you describe the cryptocurrency environment here?
Well, I think it's quite positive, in fact, because if you look at the history of blockchain, I mean, Canada has played a huge role. You've had Vitalik Buterin coming out of University of Waterloo. I mean, he dropped out to take on this project full time. You've got companies like Blockstream in Vancouver and Victoria that play a huge role in the maintenance of Bitcoin. You've got the spot ETFs in Toronto through 3IQ. So you've got the Ethereum and the Bitcoin ETFs, which, the United States is probably a year away from having something like that. They've got their futures ETF. So it's been quite progressive, I would say. And also Canada has done something quite interesting where groups like Wealthsimple and Coinberry have been, through the Ontario Securities Commission, kind of sandboxed. So they have kind of I think it's two years or so to see how this all goes. So they're trying to. I think the regulators in Canada are trying to figure this out too. They don't want to stifle innovation, but they also want to be prepared to regulate. And the regulation is good because it provides clarity to businesses so they understand where they stand. And I think in that sense, Canada is quite progressive, and I think it's growing. And also the other thing that's interesting in Canada is you have crypto mining companies. So there's a quite well-known one called HUD-8. I think they're based in Alberta. And they try to take the excess kind of like, let's say, oil flares, and they try to use that excess energy to do Bitcoin mining. Even in Quebec here, because of the cost of electricity, there's a lot of interest in cryptocurrency mining. So overall, I would say Canada's really at the forefront of this innovation, and I think Canada's taking the right steps to consider the different options around regulatory environments. So.
Okay, great. And in terms of the customers, what is the most common use you will set for cryptocurrency in developed countries as Canada or USA?
In developed countries?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would still say in Canada, the United States, it's seen as a speculative asset that's used for trading, or in the case of Bitcoin or Ethereum, maybe perhaps more of a store of value. So you're starting to see, bigger institutions like you're starting to see big companies like MicroStrategy, and you've seen Tesla put it on their balance sheet. I think people are looking at it as a long-term hedge against inflation. With what's happening now, I think the numbers are over 6% in the United States inflation, which really means it's quite a bit higher than that, in fact, in reality. So that I see as the primary use case for the time being. And there's all sorts of, DeFi derivative use cases that are growing enormously. You're also seeing the NFT market just explode. So from a retail point of view, I think NFTs and gaming are the two areas where you're going to see sort of non-crypto people starting to get interested in what's going on in the space.
Thank you. That's a very optimistic point of view about cryptocurrencies. So to go forward, so we will shift to emerging countries. How emerging markets have handled cryptocurrency, and which ones are the most popular?
Right. So, I mean, in developing countries, in my mind, the primary use case is for remittance. So countries like Vietnam, Philippines, India, these are all countries where you've got a lot of workers that work in other countries, and then they send money back, and they do that they're switching to cryptocurrency because the costs are so much lower than doing it through traditional Western Union kind of approaches, for example. In terms of the currencies, I mean, of course, there's Bitcoin is probably the most common of all cryptocurrencies, and even countries like, for example, in Zimbabwe, where there's sky-high inflation. I remember reading an article a couple of years ago where the exchanges in Zimbabwe, the price of Bitcoin was actually much higher than everywhere else in the world because the demand for Bitcoin was so high because people were trying to find a way to get around all this incredible inflation that was going on at the time. In countries like Latin America, you're seeing a coin called Dash take hold. So part of the reason for that is there's increased privacy with that coin, and it's just exploded. There's to the point where there's ATM machines in different countries in Latin America. So that is super exciting. And then, of course, right now you're hearing a lot about Cardano. Charles Hoskinson is doing a lot of work in Africa and looking at ways to use Cardano in areas like supply chains. So looking at, say, coffee prices, using it as a sort of a mechanism for ensuring that in developing countries there's always this issue of making sure that you're getting the right price for your product. And so there's been a lot of projects around using cell phones to get that pricing information. And so I see this as just an extension of that to make it even more robust than it has been. I mean, the other thing I think that's worth mentioning when we think about cryptocurrencies in developing countries is a lot of this is taking place because of what happened before this, which is cell phones. So a lot of the countries didn't have the landlines that we have, let's say, in North America, and they did a kind of a leapfrog right into cell phones. And so you started to see these interesting kind of microeconomies around tools and systems that use cell phones to relay price information, to even like M-Pesa in Kenya, where there was a way to kind of do kind of banking for the unbanked. And so this is just an extension of it. But because, you will go to a place like Uganda and you'll see people living in a very rural area, but they'll have a cell phone. And so that's so interesting that you have that. And so that makes it very easy for cryptocurrency to kind of penetrate into those markets in a way that may not have been possible without the use of cell phone technology to the extent it is today.
All right, thank you.
So you mentioned, for example, one of the usage was remittance in mostly. Would you say there is other type of usage in developing countries?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be the primary use case that gets things started. I mean, all the same use cases that you're seeing in North America will also apply to developing countries. So there's still going to be especially inflation. So, when we think about inflation in North America at 6%, you have to look at what's happening globally. Inflation is skyrocketing around the world, and it's a lot worse in many developing countries than it is in say, Canada and the United States. And so you're seeing many countries where people are looking for an alternative to their own currency to store their money effectively. And so you're getting a lot of conflict now. You're getting, you're seeing what's happening in Turkey, where they're becoming a bit anti-Bitcoin. China, of course, has been flip-flopping on whether they like or don't like cryptocurrency. Now they're on the side of we don't like it. India is kind of flipping the opposite way. They were saying we're not interested in it. Now they're saying they're interested in it. So countries are kind of figuring this out, and they're also looking at creating their own what they call central bank digital currencies. And so, China is the best example that is planning to roll one out, but they're not the only country that's looking to do that. And so we might see a little bit more friction with the existing currencies like Bitcoin as these central bank digital currencies get rolled out. But I think another big use case is simply to fight inflation, so people have another way to store their money. Venezuela is a great example where you're seeing a lot of people wanting to use cryptocurrency as they see the inflation just skyrocket out of control.
Yeah, that's a security background for them. So we're seeing also for the Chainlist Global Crypto Adoption Index of this year. They said the Vietnam, India, and Pakistan, for example, were countries leading the adoption growth of cryptocurrency. What would you say about these countries and why they are growing so rapidly in this region?
I mean, aside from the remittance issue, I mean, countries like Vietnam also have kind of a skepticism of the banking industry itself, and so I think people are very cautious of leaving their money with banks, so they really want an alternative. So another area we haven't touched on is just the idea that what happened in Cyprus, for example, where basically the banking system collapsed and everyone lost their deposits. I think there's a lot of concern about that, and also the idea of privacy, that you can hold your coins in a digital wallet and it's secure. It's external to the banking system. You don't have to worry that what might happen to that bank if there's hyperinflation or something like that. And I think that provides people kind of a bit of peace of mind. Yeah.
All right. So I think you mentioned it earlier, but I'm just gonna ask the question. So the adoption growth is very high in emerging markets. So what are the biggest threats that might stop the growth of cryptocurrency usage in these economies?
Well, I think, for example, like we have to look at what's happening in China, for example, where you saw over the summer all the mining effectively moved to other countries, including the United States, Texas, for example. They want to roll out their own currency for various reasons, and they see Bitcoin as a competitor to that. I think you're going to see that happen in other countries too, where effectively, if people are moving money out of their own central currency, then it presents a problem for governments, right? And so, do they embrace the fact that people are moving to these other currencies, cryptocurrencies, or do they want to fight it? And I think we're entering that stage now where cryptocurrencies become big enough that it's in some cases considered to be a threat. In other countries, it's going to be the opposite. So El Salvador's done the reverse. They didn't have their own currency though, so they were using the U.S. dollar, but they've taken the approach of embracing cryptocurrency. They're now doing volcanic mining. They've given everybody $30, and that $30 has effectively turned into $60 since they started. So I think, and of course there was just a report the other day that the dividends that they've made from Bitcoin to date have been used to build some schools and things like that. So I think it really depends. So some countries are going to especially I think in Latin America. You're going to see countries that don't have their own currency look at increasing adoption of cryptocurrencies because it creates an opportunity for innovation. It's attracting people and ideas to build interesting things in countries. And then in other cases, countries that have their own currencies are potentially going to see it as a threat. I don't think you're going to see that in large economies so much like Canada, the United States. It's just too small of a piece of the overall pie. But in other countries, it could present a threat, at least in the near term. And so you're going to see countries trying to ban it and whatnot. And Turkey is another example where that's starting to happen. And the fines in China are quite hefty if they catch you with cryptocurrency. So it is, not to be taken lightly, but that's sort of where we're at. So we're at the stage in the adoption cycle where you're going to see these kind of regulatory kind of fights breaking out, and some countries just seeing it as a complete threat to their own currencies, especially too. Countries, I think, as countries also launch their own CBDCs, that those countries are going to be potentially looking at from that point of view. And the irony is, a lot of these central bank digital currencies are being created by blockchain companies, like say Cosmos, for example, is one example. So it's kind of ironic that the governments are working with the blockchain industry to create their own cryptocurrencies, and then at the same time potentially outlawing the other ones. So we'll see how this all ends up.
But from your point of view, because you told us that you were working before in big institutions, so you have seen this way of centralized policies. We talk with banks and international institutions like FMA, for example. And we have seen the FMA, for example, be critical about El Salvador taking this approach. From your point of view, what is the role of how the role of the centralized institution get impacted with this phenomenon of cryptocurrency? And if you think it's a better fit for developing countries to go with the other way, like with crypto instead of.
Right. I mean, I think big institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. I mean, this is my opinion, but I see it as part of what's happening with those institutions, and we saw it especially in Latin America, is they tend to try to exert influence over those countries, and sometimes, as we saw in Argentina, that can lead to very bad policy and cause all sorts of problems. And so I think El Salvador was well prepared for the reaction they got from the IMF. I think they knew well in advance how they would be treated, but they decided to go ahead anyways. And I think to me, in my mind, I think Latin American countries don't really care as much, especially if they're a smaller economy and they don't have their own currency and they're, let's say, pegged to the U.S. dollar. In my opinion, they see this as an opportunity, and they don't really care what the policies of the IMF or the World Bank is. Because they've been so, in the past, they've been so detrimental to a lot of these countries that they want to just forge their own path. I think if it's a larger country like Brazil, for example, and they have their own currency, I think there'll be what I would see happening is not so much they would adopt, say, Bitcoin as a reserve currency, but that they would move towards regulation that makes the use of cryptocurrency, more inviting and not restrictive. So because there's also a huge opportunity for innovation, right? So it just will attract jobs. It will create opportunities to grow an industry in a country. And I mean, Brazil, for example, was when the open source kind of took off, the sort of open source technology. Brazil was right at the forefront of that, for example. So I think that it'll be different depending on the country. But the smaller ones, countries that don't have reserve currencies, I think they're going to be the ones that first consider this. And I know there's a fellow named Brock Pierce who's quite big in the crypto industry, and he's talking to heads of government. And there's a lot of governments that are following closely what's happening in El Salvador and considering the adoption. So I don't think we're going to see it stop with El Salvador. I think you're going to see more countries. And of course, the big rumor is like, when will these central banks, put cryptocurrency on their balance sheet, right? So I think we're going to see I think it's going to be very interesting in the next few years, and especially if the inflation continues and it doesn't get kind of reined in. I think you're going to see more interest to use cryptocurrency.
Okay, we'll wait for that.
I have another question. Do you think that cryptocurrency is one of the main solution for economic growth in developing countries, in your opinion?
I think it's definitely one tool that could be used for economic growth. I think we have to look at the whole. Just going back to El Salvador, because they've made cryptocurrency a reserve currency. They are the number of people that I think are going to move to El Salvador right now to help grow that industry, to help to ensure it's a success, I think is really good for the country. I think you're going to see a lot of innovation come out of El Salvador because of it. They're already doing this volcanic mining, things like that are kind of environmentally friendly, but help the government to mine cryptocurrency. So yeah, I think overall it's where the world is moving. And so I think you either become a first adopter or you wait. And I think those that start to take the risk of it potentially not working out, but it does. I think in the case of El Salvador, if it does end up working out, I think it could change the economy forever. And that's my opinion, is that the cryptocurrency is here to stay, and it's like the internet in the 1990s, right? There was the countries that started to use the internet and started to use email and websites, and it had all sorts of unintended consequences on countries, right? That it created opportunities for transparency, especially where things were done behind closed doors suddenly got exposed in ways that nobody ever expected. And so I think, and there's bad things too, right? There's also the siloing of technology and certain platforms like Facebook, where it's just now it could be everybody, but it's siloed within a few companies. But I think we're going to see the same thing with the blockchain space. So we're really talking about, in the 90s it was the innovation of communication. Now we're talking about the innovation of finance. And because we're a global world now, you can practically live anywhere in the world and be part of this global community. I think that presents huge opportunities. And just also, if you think about the NFT space and you think about gaming, it's almost mind-blowing what is possible now. And in games, I'm not a gamer of it. I could be, but I'm not. But what's fascinating there is that the idea that you could have a token in a game that's actually worth real money. You can imagine the industries that are going to get created, around that, and you're going to have industries being created in developing countries that just never existed before. And of course, IT jobs tend to pay well. So I think it's just going to further create opportunities for growth. I think you're going to see, like, for example, in Africa, there was already a pretty strong growing IT community before blockchain, but I think blockchain is just going to accelerate that tremendously. And so you're going to see countries really, I think that what you're going to see is countries will kind of leapfrog on the regulation to try to attract people to their countries.
Okay, so we will look forward to it. We are very optimistic too. So to get to the end to the interview, we are living now in the COVID. So how the pandemic and the economic crisis has changed the dynamic of cryptocurrency in these markets? You were talking a little bit of inflation. What do you said about pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two things. I mean, the inflation, maybe it was coming, whether there was a pandemic or not, but it certainly affected so much. I mean, the supply chain aspect has been so much affected because of COVID, where things slowed down, and now you've got a racing economy in the United States, but there's not the products or services to support it right now because the supply chains have all slowed down. So that's causing a lot of problems with inflation too. And I think, I mean, the primary, the thing that we'll see a lot is that people look at, Bitcoin, for example, you hear the term, it's the new gold, right? And so why do people buy gold? They buy gold as a hedge against inflation. So I think COVID has just accelerated a lot of that. I think the other major thing that's happened with COVID is it's accelerated people working from home. And so a business like ours exists, no brick and mortar, we're all virtual, we work in teams, we work through Zoom, and we can do it. And COVID just made that a reality. I used to be a consultant, I would work from home for years, and I always felt kind of lonely. And then suddenly, everybody around my neighborhood is working from home. And now they've done studies, and nobody wants to go back to the office and if they are forced to go back, they quit their job. So people have decided, they've had a taste of, the life outside of the office, and they don't want to go back. And so that's changing everything, and I think that's also affecting, the blockchain space in terms of like all the projects that are happening, the development. It's very beneficial, I think, for developing countries right there, because your team can be anywhere in the world. We have team members, my business partners in Japan. We have a developer in India. We have people in Nashville, Tennessee. We have people in Serbia that work for us. I don't really care where they live. I just care, do they do a great job for our business or not? And so maybe before, a company might say, well, we need you to be in the office 9 to 5, and we want everybody to be here. And so you would just hire Canadians, let's say, in Montreal, because you want everybody to be in that office. Now, it doesn't matter. You can be anywhere, and we just want the best people. And so I think that's creating another huge opportunity for companies and businesses that are been maybe excluded from economies, let's say in Canada, United States. Suddenly now, that doesn't matter as much. And so I think that's going to help a lot growing businesses in the future.
That's great. So we have come to the end of the podcast today. It's been very interesting to know more about cryptocurrency, and especially in developing countries, and from you, very rich experience in the world. So we want to say to all the people who are going to listen to the podcast that we invite them for our next event. We will hold a conference in 25th of November to talk more about cryptocurrency, and we will have different questions, of course. And Mr. Roberts is gonna come with us too. So please look forward to it. And thanks again for meeting us today.